Welcome to Watchtower History.
Not only was Watchtower into anti-Semitic conspiracy theories, they were also into chiropractic and homeopathic conspiracy theories. That's where all their quack medical stuff came from. And a lot of that's tied into anti-Semitism.
Well, a lot of that we did talk about when we talked about his dealings with different chiropractors with pneumonia, and one of his chiropractors ended up in prison.
Rutherford was under a doctor's treatment in San Diego, and this doctor told him to spend as much time as possible there in San Diego or in Southern California because the climate would be better for his health. And we see this also mentioned in the J.W. Messenger paper, 1931. And I think this is why the Proclaimers book is saying what they're saying, because this J.W. Messenger says anyone can be a Christian in peacetime, but Judge Rutherford was one of the wartime Christians, and for daring so to be, went to Atlanta Penitentiary under 4 sentences of 20 years each. When he emerged, he was in poor physical condition, and even now has the use of but one lung. Since his return from Atlanta, prudence and good common sense dictated that, working as hard as he constantly works, he should have the benefit of the most equitable winter climate to be found. It is a matter of common knowledge among meteorologists, weather experts, that San Diego, California is as near perfect for winter climate as it is possible to get. About 250,000 people besides meteorologists have made the same discovery and make their city their winter home. For years after he emerged from prison, Judge Rutherford went to San Diego to work during the winter months, renting such quarters as could be secured. His physician, Dr. A.G. Eckles of San Diego, urged him to make the city his permanent winter home. And in the latter part of the year 1929, some brethren, out of their own personal funds, arranged for the erection of Beth Sarim, the House of Princes, of which several illustrations appear in this issue. So this messenger, again, ties in his sickness with his prison experience. But as we saw earlier, that's a little bit of a stretch. He was sick a full 2 months after he got out of prison. So why they're linking it, I guess to gather sympathy, I don't know.
Or they had a plan, and they were slowly introducing reasons, logic, implications, like this one. Meteorologists, they're telling you, experts, meteorologists are saying San Diego is the best place. So that's like, a little putting it in your head first and then later doing it once it's already been established is not a shock. So I'm going to add that little point here in there for that in this discussion that maybe we'll cover again later.
Right. And it says here that his physician's name, we now know the name, was Dr. A.G. Eckles of San Diego. This gives us a data point that we can search now. And in searching this doctor, we found some interesting things. R.J. Martin writes in The Golden Age, which is now the Wake magazine, the truth about the San Diego house. And in it, he makes the same statement that Dr. Eckles has repeatedly urged him to spend as much time as possible in San Diego. So we know the doctor's name. We now have a data point to search.
And it's also noted in The Golden Age, which was a publication by the society itself. And getting back to my earlier point about setting the stage of things, the Awake or the Golden Age said it first, and then a yearish later, whatever that, how much time went by, now the private Jehovah's Witnesses groups are making the same statement that the Golden Age said. So I'm going to stick with my earlier reasoning of my comment on setting the stage for things. Because that wasn't, Beth Sarim was not a small decision. When you make a decision to take your president of your corporation and build him a mansion in California in 1931, that was Depression era period. I mean, this is a big thing.
Yeah, a lot of the people were starving at the time, and unfortunately, Rutherford, as we can see, was living in luxury. I mean, look at this house. It's a very beautiful home. We'll get into the details of its building here shortly, but this is the deed for the Beth Sarim property and the building of it. Dr. Eckles purchased the land which Beth Sarim was built on, and him and the other contributor bought the most expensive and best architect of the time period. They didn't spare any expense. They wanted the best of the best. So according to the state of California historical records here, it says Robert J. Martin of 117 Adams Street, Brooklyn, New York, affiliated with the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society and the Jehovah's Witnesses, he purchased the property from Albert Eckles on October 8th, 1929. In the Tuesday, April 4th, 1922 New Era Enterprise, Dr. Eckles is described as a vertebraist. Why was he described this way and not as a chiropractor? Well, the October 18th, 1921 Enterprise gives us a little more of the story. It says, Brother Eckles, who spent 60 days in jail, is practicing again. Indeed, we are getting some hard usage from him. He says the more he loves you, the harder he hits. California law is surely narrow when it comes to healthology, unless it happens to be some fake miracle healer. These pass by with a salute of religion. As elsewhere, Bible students are a mark for the missiles of the King of Tartarus. We know of no place where infirmities will receive such gentle treatment as in this birthplace of California. He might tell you a whole lot of things which would interest the friends, but more again, all you need is an auto and a camp outfit to exist anywhere in the state. The roads are smooth everywhere, and we saw some of them being built in that footage from Imperial Valley, California, back in our first trumpet blast discussion. And the second clipping, this is from the Golden Age, and it now gives us details why he went to prison. He was fined by the Medical Board of California and made him pay a fine because we're getting too much business away from the medical doctors.
Now, I'll come to his defense a little bit on that, to not totally, discredit him. We'll give him a fair shot. You could see medical doctors getting angry if business is taken away. But was he taking that much away that they were going to single him out? That's another, the other speculation of that. And usually full board doctors won't go after other full board doctors. It's very unprofessional. So there had to be something else going on there, in my opinion. Like you very rarely will a lawyer follow a bar charge against another attorney unless it's really something or lots of money involved for them. So for this to happen, I'm questioning that statement. Usually, why would a chiropractor be taking away from a physician's salary and money anyway? Most people go to a chiropractor to get their bones adjusted, not for other issues, not for diet, nutrition. So there's probably more to it.
And he's basically practicing without a license. That's another reason. So he gets fined for it. He refuses to pay the fine, and he spends 60 days in jail just because of his pride, his ego, I guess you could say.
Now, was there a license that he could have activated?
Possibly, but
because now here again, the investigation continues. Knowing Rutherford, based on everything what happened, he probably would have paid it for him to make the whole system look good and to make it come out better. There's a lot of stuff in here showing that he was practicing without a license, which it was probably easier back then to do. Like the judge himself, he had a few cases that he did as a lawyer, and then he served on a panel as a judge, and now he's nicknamed the judge, and he's a judge. Well, was he really a judge?
It's still illegal. He's practicing without a license.
Mm-hmm.
And offers a penalty for it. So
Mm-hmm.
the state of California considered him a quack, literally a medical quack. So,
but the society said otherwise. So,
but they had a lot of interesting medical suggestions in those early magazines
Hmm.
are very laughable today.
Oh,
And
it went, actually, a lot of it went on well into the 80s
yeah,
with a lot of really interesting stuff. It continues today with blood transfusions, but it long after these articles, if you had an organ transplant, you were a cannibal. So the society does have a history of their own version of medicine, to say the least.
There was an article in the Golden Age where they called the president of the American Medical Association the kind of Jew that crucified Christ. So, other quack medical advice, which Rutherford and Watchtower publicized, sometimes had ties to anti Semitism or even dangerous chiropractic cures, which harmed or even killed the adherents of their so called health or health conspiracies. And I think that's another conspiratorial thinking that Watchtower got into. It wasn't just the anti Semitic conspiracy theories, they were also into these medical quackery conspiratorial thinking as well. That's
Well,
why they
they,
had
they,
so
they
many.
were into the aluminum, the anti vaccine, even when transplants and medical technology and new information came forward, they called it cannibalism. So that they immediately attack something. And then I find it very funny years later, they totally act like it never happened. And I clearly remember being young and them thinking heart transplants when they were coming out was cannibalism.
And not only, do they pretend it never happened, they continue to push some conspiratorial thinking about blood transfusions today as well. And we covered a little bit of that already in showing how Watchtower was using the old blood libel anti Semitic conspiracy as justification to not have blood transfusions. And so we're going to get a little more into some of those quack medical advice that Watchtower was giving at the time.
But
Stay tuned.
before we do, I'd like to add one point right here, that the quacks who he's using, and not that we're saying chiropractors are bad, but when you're using chiropractor to cure other diseases, that's not correct. But look at how they worship him. A chiropractor once treating Rutherford said he saw his back suffering because of the pneumonia he had. You are a miracle of God's grace, putting him on a pedestal and telling others he is bearing a burden that would utterly crush you, and calls others hypocrites and everybody, that they'll get their wish and their reward and all that.
And what do they prescribe to him? Alcohol.
so when Walter Salter wrote this letter to Rutherford stating that there are multiple things that were happening in the office that he was not very happy with. And one of them was the amount of alcohol that was being smuggled in. And in response, Clayton Woodworth, the editor of the Golden Age, wrote an article, Why Salter Lost His Job. Walter was the head of the Canadian branch of the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society. In the article, Woodworth says the following about Rutherford and what his chiropractor prescribed to him. It says, "It is nothing new that Jesus and his followers were accused of being wine bidders. Did that charge affect in any way Jesus standing with his heavenly Father? Not an iota. Why did Jesus use it? He was under great nervous strain. It provided a perfect nutrient, immediately assimilable. A chiropractor, once treating Judge Rutherford, and the writer at the same time, said to the judge, as he saw his back suffering from ankylosis, which the article says is 6 vertebrae fused together by pneumonia, 'You are a miracle of God's grace.' At the same time, he said to the writer, He is bearing a burden that would utterly crush you. Read that paragraph twice and make the most of it, all you hypocrites that wish to remain hypocrites to the end. You will get your wish and your reward. Now, Rutherford's chiropractor followed the American Institute of Homeopathy's good practices. And one of those practices said, in view of the great prevalence of intemperance in the use of alcohol and of its disastrous effects upon the individual and the community, the American Institute of Homeopathy declares that no medical practitioner should prescribe alcohol without a grave sense of responsibility. That alcohol, in whatever form, should be prescribed with as much care as any powerful drug, and that the directions for its use should be so framed as not to be interpreted as a sanction for excess or for the continuance of its use when the occasion which induced the prescription shall have passed.
Is that the reason he started drinking? In his defense, we'll give him, because some say he wasn't drinking, then others were saying there was a lot of alcohol after Russell passed off from the earth. That alcohol was heavily used by the people running the show. So,
well, to be fair, the claim is that if they would drink too much, if they drank in excess, it was usually in the private of their own rooms. But there was always wine or something at the dinners for those who wanted it.
But there was always plenty of excess in their private quarters also.
Exactly.
And
so that's Tony what Moyle accused him of.
Basically, this is Tony Morris. I couldn't stand by idle and not say nothing. And if they came at me, I would have been gone and said, you know what? I don't need this in my life. I just don't get how the obedience they have from their members to just see stuff and just ignore it like just nothing ever happened.
And remember, this particular chiropractor and chiropractor association that he was involved with thought it was okay to prescribe alcohol under certain circumstances. I mean, if you're going to prescribe alcohol to someone who's prone to alcoholism, it's like trying to tell somebody who's drowning to drink more water. Not generally a good idea.
Well, Rutherford liked the guy. Hey, I can drink. Okay, my doctor told me. I mean, I'm okay with it. I mean, if you told me, Paul, you're not drinking enough wine when we do our recordings, okay, I can fix that.
That's not the kind of spirits we're talking about. Penton has a story in his book, Apocalypse Delayed, where Rutherford was so drunk at the 1927 Toronto convention that they had to literally prop him up, put him up at the podium, prop him up, and he gave his lecture.
In Professor Penton's Apocalypse Delayed, he says that although Jehovah's Witnesses have done everything possible to hide accounts of the judge's drinking habits, they are simply too notorious to be denied. Former workers at the Watchtower's New York headquarters recount tales of his inebriation and drunken stupors. The late Carl Prosser, who was present at the time, recounted how difficult it was to get him to the podium to give a talk at the 1927 Toronto Bible Student Convention because he was so drunk. In San Diego, California, where he spent his winters from 1930 until his death, an elderly lady long spoke of how she sold him great quantities of liquor when he came to purchase medicines in her husband's drugstore. But perhaps the most damning account of his drinking habits appears in an open letter to him from former Canadian Watchtower branch overseer Walter Salter.
They had to help him off the stage because he was so drunk.
Well, it was like Weekend at Bernie's. They just moved them around,
waves his arms.
Brought him back to Beth Sarim.
But he was a functional drunk, right? Unless you were behind the scenes and knew what was going on, you really wouldn't have known. But if you listen to some of those Rutherford recordings from, the radio lectures that he's giving, sometimes it sounds to me like he was slurring his words, like he was drunk or something.
It's comical in his defense. I don't drink that much now. I'll have a few, beers over the course of a while, or a couple glasses of wine or whatever. But when I was younger and you'd go out with friends and all that, as long as I was sitting down at the bar stool, I was good. I could talk. You wouldn't know. You just never. And then you get up. Whoa. and all that. So I could see them propping him up with a stool at a podium and him just going like a drunken lunatic, like the Who song, preaching from my chair, sitting in a bar preaching from my chair. He was a man who, by nature, it was natural and came natural for him to condemn, point judgment. So he could easily get up and give one of his talks condemning everyone, including his own members, if they weren't up to snuff. So people follow, for whatever reason, people follow leaders like that. At my work, I'm not going to say what I get into, but at my work, a lot of times, people naturally follow the person with the biggest mouth, the loudest, and they could come up with the most stupid idea. People just go and they cower down and they just follow because they don't want it. They don't want to make waves. They don't want to rock the boat. That was Rutherford. Everybody just cowered down. Like Brother Barr, I'll call him Brother Barr, said everybody was afraid. He was not afraid to tread on anyone's toes. So that was just his personality.
There were enough honest-hearted men, hungering for the truth, desirous of doing the will of God, to prevent the organization from collapsing.
Rather than giving in to disappointment over what did not happen in 1914, the Bible students kept their minds open to the significance of what had taken place. The World War and its aftermath had become the world-shaking events proclaimed by Russell almost 40 years earlier. The Bible students were coming to the realization that Christ's presence began in 1914, and that the world's last days were underway.
In the film, they talk about they were worshiping the creature more than the creator.
2 months after Russell's death, Joseph Rutherford was appointed to oversee the work. Rutherford had been a close associate of Russell, traveling with him and speaking in his defense. Like Russell, he believed that the good news had to be preached. He was dynamic and could not be intimidated. Yet not everyone appreciated these traits, even among the Bible students.
Brother Rutherford, he was an entirely different personality, brusque in manner, and he didn't fear to tread on anyone's toes. I think this had a tremendous test on the brothers, because they were really worshipping the creature more than the creator.
Who was worshiping the creature?
Yeah, it's easy for somebody like Rutherford to point fingers because it's his natural personality to just get up there drunk, and it's what he's doing is coming natural, condemning everyone, even his own members, if they're not falling up to his book sales expectation or hours expectations. So all this came naturally to him. So he could be a functional drunk and get away with what he's doing. Now fuel it with alcohol, and he created a whole religion. Remember, he's communicating with angels here in Beth Sarim, having all this new light. How much of that was alcohol induced? And from what the reports show, when he didn't have lady friends around him, nobody really wanted to be around him. Even the reports from Watchtower itself, when he died, brief announcement. Okay, everybody moved on. They left him alone in Beth Sarim. Let's wait till he dies. We'll move on. It's like they didn't even want anything to do with him.
Yeah, they just kind of paused, made the announcement, and then they just kept working. They didn't even take any time off.
Yep.
But not only was he a functional drunk, but he demanded loyalty to the point that anyone who opposed him or even questioned what he was doing, such as questioning his prescription for alcohol, in this case, he would attack. That's why he created the two witness rule. That's why
Well,
he pushed disfellowshipping a little bit more, and Nor took it even further.
it actually started before that. When he was doing his coup, he demanded loyalty oaths be signed by members of the Bethel family. And a lot of them had nowhere else to go. So what do? Say no and get thrown out in the street? So he was Jim Jones by any means, by all means, of someone who behaved in a manner not typical of somebody who was Christ-like in his personality.
And he used the experiences of his life, as we've said throughout this entire roadmap series, like his imprisonment. He used those stories to try to find reasons to prove that his organization was a chosen organization. And in this case, his imprisonment and his being sick. Now, I always thought that he was sick and lost the lung when he was in prison. I guess I remembered it incorrectly. He didn't get sick, as we discovered, until months afterwards.
And if you've seen our discussion on Beth Sarim, and we look at the evidence about what Rutherford claims happened to him in prison, and he says, I was sick and I was in prison and I had pneumonia and I lost a lung. When we look at the documented evidence, it doesn't look like he was that sick until months after. It appears that he was probably healthy when he was in prison.
In good health.
Yeah. So it's when he come out of prison during the influenza outbreak that he gets sick. So Months later, yeah. The Proclaimer's book says very specifically, Brother Rutherford had a severe case of pneumonia after his release from unjust imprisonment in 1919. So if I say that phrase, what do you understand by that? What is the Proclaimer's book saying or claiming?
That he got pneumonia due to prison.
Okay.
And weren't there Watchtowers that made that claim also?
They were later on, but this is a first-hand account written at the time. So in the May 27th, 1919 St. Paul Enterprise, it says that Rutherford was on the convention program. However, it says Brother Rutherford has been quite sick with pneumonia, but is rapidly recovering and will be present. He was very, very sick, exactly as Proclaimer's book says, but there's something not right here. This is May 27th. When was Rutherford and his friends released from prison?
Well, weren't they released in March for this? So March, April, May, that's 2 months.
Over 2 months, yeah.
So he had pneumonia for 2 months?
I don't think he got pneumonia when he was in prison. We won't deal with the unjust imprisonment part here, because that's another discussion for a future time. The statement is specifically about Rutherford's sickness. So that's what we're going to take a look at and see what documented evidence we have about that period of time. The March 27th, 1919 National Labor Tribune has a letter that J.F. Rutherford wrote from the Long Island jail before he was sent to the Atlanta penitentiary. It also has an interesting letter that was written by the wife of George Fisher, the man who dared disfellowship Rutherford, about their prison experience during the Christmas of 1918. And it talks about all the Christmas gifts that they received. More than 150 prisoners in the castle had nothing for Christmas. Our brethren got a list of them from the officers and, out of their own abundance, made up a little Christmas package for each of the unfortunates. And by this many were made happy. Even the officers were so pleased that they were heard to say, "Never was anything like that done at this place before." And so we can truly say that the Lord was in the prison that Christmas. I knew each of you would be glad to know these things because each of you had a part in them. But it says something very specific that helps illustrate the point about whether or not Rutherford was sick while in prison. In the second paragraph of the letter, she says, many of their presents were packages of good, substantial, and wholesome food. Since receiving it, they have much improved physically. The oranges and grapefruit have been specially beneficial and probably have saved them from much sickness and suffering. The other foods have built them up physically, and each one is feeling much better. They're very grateful to the Lord for these temporal blessings and are very desirous of expressing their thankfulness and gratitude to the dear ones sending the gifts. Remember, this is during the 1918 influenza outbreak. We've done a couple discussions also about the Watchtower celebrations of birthdays and Christmas in 1918 and 19. And so if you haven't seen those, please go take a look. You'll find some of the historical information there quite interesting. I find it interesting and a little ironic that the organization that dumped Christmas later is saved by the Christmas gifts, and it's also what kept them healthy while they were in prison. Very interesting. We have a couple telegrams from the National Labor Tribune that seems to suggest that they were in good health when they left prison. And we know from the Watchtower that they had a dinner for them, and there's no mention of Rutherford being sick until we get to this issue of the Enterprise at the end of it.
Even though the proclaimers said it was at that time.
It's written very strangely. It says, Brother Rutherford had a severe case of pneumonia after his release from unjust imprisonment in 1919. Why are you even mentioning the unjust imprisonment if it has nothing to do with the pneumonia? Right? They seem like they're almost tying it together.
They're trying to tie it in.
Right. We have multiple lines of evidence, including from the wife of the man who dared disfellowship Rutherford, Harriet Fisher, that illustrates that the men were relatively healthy even at Christmas time of 1918. They were healthy in March of 1919 when they were released. We don't hear anything about any sickness of Rutherford until later. So they have to bring out the point that he was put in prison and it was unjust, but they're tying in the pneumonia to it, and it really has no relation at all. So it's
based on the time frame of about 2 months. It could have just said he was recovering from pneumonia, period, and left it at that.
Right, but we know from this article he's sick a full 2 months after. Right. And these telegrams from the National Labor Tribune says, may it have been with God's providence to keep you all in the best of health. So when they were released from prison, they were in good health.
Mm-hmm.
It isn't until the end of May that Rutherford's sick. So point number one in the article, I say there's something suspicious, or it's suspicious how it's written. His sickness has nothing to do with his imprisonment, for sure.
Based on the documentation here, that seems like a solved issue.
Yeah, it's suspiciously written. So it's point number one has an issue. Even better. So in this June 3rd, 1919 Enterprise, there's a letter about that May convention that Rutherford spoke at. Even though Rutherford was suffering from pneumonia, as the Enterprise says, the convention that he went to, he gave a lecture for over 2 hours. This is during the 1918 pandemic, and I don't think anyone was wearing masks. So if he's that sick, he's infecting everyone around him. It's a super spreader event, right? So how sick was he? Or he was pretty sick and he pushed himself too far. We do know that he ended up with the use of just one lung because of the pneumonia that he had. It did damage he did get very, very ill, and it did some damage, internal damage. They should have been doing their social distancing, I guess. So check out our Beth Sarim discussion on that. Very, very interesting.
There's even a possibility that he was sick and lost his lung before he was even in Watchtower, when he fell through the ice.
So the Morning Union, Grass Valley, California, January 17th, 1917, has an interesting story about Rutherford. And the date, of course, January 17th, this is right after he became president of the Watchtower Society. In the story, it says, in order to earn a little money to assist, he stayed out of school one winter to sell books. He had many strenuous experiences tramping through the deep snows from one farmhouse to another. He was almost drowned on one occasion, the ice breaking whilst crossing a creek. After struggling in the ice for hours and until after dark, he reached the shore. Being in a strange country, he knew not where to go, but late at night, with his clothing frozen on him, he found a farmhouse and was taken in. It was then and there that he made a resolution that if he ever should make money enough, he would never turn away anyone who was attempting to work his way through school. And we've seen, some of those long winter stories, Little House on the Prairie. But does this sound legitimate to you?
Well, in the winter, to fall in water for hours, I don't want to make a call that I can't make not being there, but being from up north, the water will suck the heat out of you, regardless of what you're wearing. Hours, if a half hour, maybe, but for hours, if to be out on the lake, it's sounding like the ice broke,
Mm-hmm.
and then took hours to get in. You're in the cold water. To me, I don't see that being realistic.
How long does it take to get frostbite?
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't take that long if you're
Mm-hmm.
if you're in, if the ice broke and there's ice around you. I don't know.
You could get online. There's some program where it tells you if you fall in the Atlantic Ocean and in the North Atlantic Ocean, how long it will take. And remember, water, it frozen, it's below 32. So the water not frozen is at 32 degrees. Stick your hand in a bucket of ice and see how long you could, just your hand, see how long you could keep it there. Now jump your whole body in that and see how long you'll last. So I'm not leaning toward that being true. Not because it's Rutherford. If it was about anyone, I'd probably say the same thing.
And this is a little further south, so how much snow do they get? Well, the long winter, there was more snow in the northern hemisphere of the United States at the time, so it's possible. But I don't know, hours, maybe he meant it felt like it was hours. I don't know. Yeah.
Well, if the ice is breaking, one, it's thick enough to walk out on at some point.
Yeah.
So that takes a lot of cold to freeze a lake.
Yeah.
And if you fall in that, you ask any ice fisherman who's fallen in, the first thing they're doing is getting out because that water will pull the heat. Remember, not being scientific, but heat goes to cold. So it's leaving you. And your body's now at this point, your body is pulling everything in for your core. And then the next phase is you shiver. And then once you stop shivering, you're done. So not sure about that one.
All right. Yeah. Interesting. After recording this, we found a couple other versions of this story. In The Messenger, the July 19th, 1927 issue from the Toronto Convention, it reads, as a boy, he longed for education. And at 16 years of age, this Missouri boy, even then over 6 feet tall, braved all winds and weathers selling books among the farmers of his community, far and near. On one of these occasions, his weight crushed the thin ice of a stream, and in freezing weather, he was drenched from head to foot, and only escaped pneumonia that night by rising from his bed and resorting to the most extreme exercise to bring about a perspiration. The third version of this story was reported years after Rutherford's death by the Watchtower attorney, Hayden C. Covington. And Covington said in his recording on November 19th, 1978, just some days before he passed away.
He was had been in younger life a book agent selling books, you see, and he was going along in Missouri and slipped and fell through the ice, and he took pneumonia and was about to die, and he prayed to the Lord that he came out of that. Why, he would never turn a book agent away, you see. So Brother Rutherford had to get away from the cold, the intense cold in the east in the wintertime. And he had one lung, collapsed lung. One lung was collapsed. Right. There was danger of him getting pneumonia because of that experience when he fell in the water, nearly froze to death. You remember? And he said he wouldn't. Right. He wouldn't run a book agent out of his office. You see. And also the prison experience. Oh yeah, his prison experience. But here.
So there's some discrepancies between these stories, and we're going to get into these discrepancies into a lot more detail in our discussion following the roadmap, when we're going to look at some of the other accusations against Rutherford. But in Rutherford's version of the story, he didn't get pneumonia. Covington suggested that he did, and that it was the cause of the collapsed lung, and not his prison experience years later. Covington's version is secondhand, and that may be suspect because he's recounting the story years later. But on the other hand, Rutherford's varying versions of the story bring about serious questions as well. Is it possible to fall through the ice in winter, remain for hours until dark, and then reach the shore? How long does it take to get frostbite just from the air? How could your clothing be frozen to you and not get hypothermia? Was he sick when he was in prison? Did he get the collapsed lung from when he was in prison?
After he got out of prison and ended up with pneumonia, he was supposed to go to Brooklyn on June 4th, 1919, for a continuation of that sedition trial. There were some things that were thrown out from writ of error. They were not exonerated, as we've discussed in our Faith in Action review.
And with that said, for the people listening, even in the past few minutes, we've repeated different things that we said in the past. There's a reason why we took this down a whole path, a roadmap, as you might say, to show the documentation, the proof, and everything, so that now what we're talking about, the actual, whatever, for lack of a better word, accusation, or hey, calling him to the carpet, now we go back and say, well, listen to that. This is where we got this from. So there is a method to our madness, and it slowly, as this series unwinds, you'll see why. So, Jeff, I'm sorry I interrupted you.
No worries. We've discussed this already, showing the evidence of how he was trying to prove that his imprisonment, his sickness took, if you measured 1,260 days, it took you right to that very 1922 Cedar Point Convention, to the very day, to the very hour, and the very lecture that Rutherford gave on ADV.
Oh, wait, there was a leap year.
There was a leap year, and there are a few other points of interest where he just fudged the numbers and tried to make it work. On the 26th day of March 1919, the Society's officers were released from prison. And late of the same evening, many of the consecrated assembled at Bethel and other places on the earth to give praise to God and to our Lord Jesus Christ. The next day, the 27th of March, plans began to be laid to reorganize the work. This did not escape Satan, but doubtless angered him. He and his earthly agencies would have, without question, destroyed the remnant of Zion on earth, but were prevented from doing so
by the Lord's providences. So Rutherford's stating here in the article, it was on the 26th day of March, 1919, that they were released from prison. And they didn't start the work, or as he says here, the thinking about the work, until the 27th of March, 1919. However, when you look at the April 15th, 1919 Watchtower and the April 1st, 1919 St. Paul Enterprise, it says that they were released on bail on March 21st, 6 days previous. So in this article, this whole interpretation is based around Rutherford's being released from prison. And he's saying that they were released from prison on the 26th day of March, 1919. However, when we go to the primary source, we go back to the Watchtower of the time. If we look at the April 15th, 1919 Watchtower, it states that they were released on March 21st, 5 days previous.
And is there any other outside source of Watchtower that confirms this?
The St. Paul Enterprise of April 1st, 1919 also says it was March 21st that they were released on bail, released from prison. They left March 25th from Atlanta, it says, and arrived in Brooklyn. And it says that they didn't start the work until the 27th, or started thinking about the work till the 27th. All right, so we have a discrepancy here of about 6 days already, because he's trying to make all these literal days actually work. And what he's doing is he's fudging the numbers. 1920 was a leap year. So there's probably 7 days. He's off by a week in order to try and make this work. I see him as basically lying about the date of the release from prison in order to make his new Nation article or interpretation work.
And think about it. This was before the internet, when everybody could just get online, get an issue that was 10 years old. Okay. Remember, a lot of the Bible students left. Do the new Bible students have the 10-year-old articles from back then? So in order to find out that March 21st was the actual date, you'd need one of the original 4/15/1919 Watchtowers or St. Paul Enterprise articles to confirm all this. Who did that? Apparently nobody. Yeah, until now. Nobody fact checked that. So for 100 years, over 100 years, they've been able to say the release date is March 26th, and they started getting to work the next day, the 27th, to make their 1290, 1260 lineup and all that, and 1290 prophecies, which they changed anyway.
Because they realized it didn't work.
Well, that's never stopped them before.
So let me read now what he said about their release from prison, right? So on page 72 of this article, he says, on the 26th day of March, 1919, knowing now what we know, keep that in mind. On the 26th day of March, 1919, the Society's officers were released from prison. And late of the same evening, many of the consecrated assembled at Bethel and other places on the earth to give praise to God and our Lord Jesus Christ. On the next day, the 27th of March, plans began to be laid to reorganize the work. This did not escape Satan, but doubtless angered him. He and his earthly agencies would have, without question, destroyed the remnant of Zion on earth, but were prevented from doing so by the Lord's gracious providences. So there's a couple of things here. Not only is he fudging the number by several days in order to make this work, he's again bringing in this replacement theology to say, hey, Satan's trying to destroy the remnant of Zion, and we're the remnant of Zion.
And all this is directly from the birth of a nation.
He says the water or flood here symbolizes teachings or doctrines set forth amongst the people. Since the devil could not reach the church, he purposed now to overwhelm her influence by the false doctrines that he would send amongst the people. Be it noted that from 1919 forward, there was a great flood of modernism amongst nominal Christendom. There was an open advocacy by ecclesiastics. Remember, here's these key words again that he keeps using, and we're going to talk about that in a future discussion. There was an open advocacy by ecclesiastics, big business, and politicians of the devil's scheme. The League of Nations, again, the evident purpose being to divert the minds of the people from the testimony concerning God's kingdom. Various plans for peace and reconstruction were brought forth to attract the attention of the people, and these things so absorbed the attention, particularly of the ruling factors, that little heed was given to the Lord's people and what they were doing. And so, in other words, he's saying there's a conspiracy amongst the people of the earth to prevent them from hearing our message. It's all about my message, this new message that we're giving about the new nation, about the new Zion, about the new Israel.
And that's because the devil failed to reach them. So now he's using outside other influences to attack.
So since Rutherford is the one who kind of created this organization and the truth that preserved it, he's basically saying he's the one who conquered the dragon by the truths that he's trying to present, that he's trying to drown the woman with. So keep in mind what Rutherford's doing here is taking an idea from the finished mystery that the water is coming out of the mouth of the dragon was actually truth. So if the dragon is Satan, how can Satan speak truth? And so Rutherford's taking this idea and putting his own little twist on it. He's saying...
Actually, that does make sense.
Okay, why?
Read it.
Since Rutherford gave the organization the truth that preserved it, it's Rutherford here who conquered the dragon here by the truths it was trying to drown the woman with, because he's making the waters here the truths. And so it's Rutherford's truths, right? He's the way he's arguing it is these truths. Well, why would the dragon speak truth? Why would Satan speak truth?
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, right?
But yes, that statement is correct.
All right, so here's what Rutherford says. Now he's saying, now take your pencil and count 1,260 literal days from the date releasing of the Society's officers from prison and see what we find. Right? And so we already said it was March 21st. We know that's the actual date. We have multiple sources to confirm that. But they really didn't get back to Bethel till around the 26th because they left Atlanta later. And they didn't. He's saying, well, I can't date it from then. I got to date it from, maybe when we started to think about the work. So he's trying to force the numbers arbitrarily. So he's trying to make it 1,260 literal days to September 8th, 1922. And so I'm going to read now, why is he making September 8th, 1922 very, very important? This was during the Cedar Point Convention, remember? So, and this is one of the days of the convention. So he's not even dating it to the convention. He's dating it to a specific day. And dating it to a specific time of that specific day, of that specific convention, from the specific moment that they started to think about the work a week after they were released from prison.
The funniest part of it is, had they dated it to the 1st of September, they would have been closer. From the March 21st to the September, they would have been closer than doing what they did.
Yeah. But again, it has to all... Rutherford didn't speak on that day. I don't think he spoke on that day.
And he wanted it to be about himself.
He wants to be about him. And not just about him. He wanted it to be about a specific talk that he gave. What was the most important thing at that Cedar Point convention? All he's saying is, it's this talk that I gave on that day. So the ADV talk was on September 8th. I gave that talk. That's where the whole message changed. He's not pointing at the convention. He's pointing at his talk. That's his point. Then it changes later to, well, that didn't work, so we got to make it just the convention in the 1,260 literal days. So the paragraph here says, Friday, September 8th was designated on the program as the day. It was thus designated because on that day, the speakers discussed the subject of the Lord's presence and of his kingdom now being put into operation. That's the new interpretation they're spinning in 1914. And as the most important thing to both the church and the world. At 9 o'clock, there was a praise service, and at 9:30, Brother Rutherford delivered a discourse on the subject, the kingdom. Previous to this time, large banners had been hung in different parts of the grounds and halls containing the letters ADV, or many of the friends were guessing, of course, what this meant, and the guesses were diverse and numerous. The real purpose of these banners was to fix the minds of the brethren upon the importance of the day. A large banner, 36 feet in length, in 3 colors, had been made by the Society's artist and was strung above the speaker's stand, and so folded that it could not be determined what was on it until the psychological moment. Brother Rutherford's address concluded with the words, Advertise, advertise, advertise the king and his kingdom. When he was repeating these words, the strings holding the banner were cut, and it gracefully unfolded before the audience, containing these same words, Advertise the king and his kingdom. And so he's literally trying to make it go 1,260 literal days to his giving that advertise, advertise, advertise lecture. So Rutherford's entire reasoning behind, this is the new nation, and it all proves we're the chosen ones, is because it points to my lecture I gave. Advertise, advertise, advertise for 1,260 literal days.
From the time I got out of prison.
But it wasn't the time he got out of prison. He's
time
lying about that too.
Lying about that too. Wow.
He's got to fudge it to make it work. Not just fudge the numbers, but fudge the events. Or he takes things that he caused and say everyone else did it.
He's good at it.
Almost every single one of these points in the article is almost exactly the opposite when you look at the original history here.
And he had us in a loop researching, double checking what we've already done. That's how good he is. You get the facts and then you read his stuff and you're like, wait, literally, he's good. He's good. I can't count how many times I've second, third guessed myself reading something where, wait, no, I don't remember. And you spend, and he's great. You spend so much time researching what he says only to find something different later on. And then when you look for it, you find another article that totally, it's like.
So on June 4th, Rutherford was supposed to be in Brooklyn to discuss the writ of error and the points of the sedition trial. They were only released on bail. They were not exonerated, as we've shown the evidence and documentation for already. His physician wrote the court and the newspaper, it was reported in the Brooklyn Daily Eagle, that Rutherford was too sick, unable to get out of bed, dying, as a matter of fact, that he could not attend the trial.
The article says, the news of the reversal of the conviction of the Russellites may result in the saving of the life of Joseph F. Rutherford, who is reported to be dying in Los Angeles, California, of pleural pneumonia. According to Jesse Fuller, physicians attending Leader Rutherford declare he is raving about the fact that he was required to appear on his bond in court June 4th. Judge Chatfield, on the request of Mr. Fuller, had telegraphed to the sick man's bedside that he will not be required to come to Brooklyn, then if still ill. The news of the reversal is hoped to have a salutary effect. Other Enterprise articles mentions how Rutherford was healing and would be speaking at a convention soon. Brother Rutherford has been quite sick with pneumonia, but is rapidly recovering and will be present. Other articles mention how he spoke for hours while he was supposedly sick, and another one stating that his physician was not permitting him to travel as yet.
So this was the end of May, almost June, that this is reported in the newspaper. We have a letter that was published in the Enterprise by Bonnet. And we discussed Bonnet before in our Miracle Wheat discussion. That was his brilliant idea, of course. He was the one who took care of the Watchtower cemetery plot, and he's the one who designed the pyramid monument. Bonnet went to visit Rutherford on that exact day, on June 4th, 1919. And he went to the resort, to the hotel where Rutherford was at, and couldn't find him.
This was written on June 4th, exactly the day Rutherford was supposed to be in court testifying. While in Arizona, I learned of Brother J.F. Rutherford having been taken by his physician to the Arrowhead Hot Springs Hotel, 7 miles north of this city, for recovery from his severe and nearly fatal illness. Hence, to hasten my arrival, I chose the southern route over the hot sands country with a 12 hours earlier start from Phoenix rather than the customary line of travel, and found the trip tolerably comfortable. And after a 2 hours wait on the street corner for an Arrowhead car, I reached the health resort 10 minutes after the judge, as he is called there, and his devoted wife had left for the daily doctor-ordered walk about the spacious grounds and mountain paths. I searched for them 2.5 hours and finally located them in their room, to which they had returned during my absence, to find them outside, the hot sun beating the while against the southern mountain slope. Just what the sick man needs. Hot and dry is what his physicians prescribe for him now. Phoenix in Arizona is where he believes he at the present time should be. And, for a month at least, though the truth service duty draws on him heavily, so that he chafes under the enforced restraint. To be away from his desk is his cross. He still suffers pain in his left lung, resulting from the vitiated air he had to breathe from last July until in March. He was at death's door. His recovery seems a miracle. The condition of his health and lungs was such that a hypodermic injection to alleviate his intense suffering would have proven fatal. He had the best medical attention, and some of it gratis, as doubtless a mark of high appreciation and sympathy for his trying experience of the past 12 months. And he had the benefit and comfort of his own home. Fortunately, he was in California and not in the eastern states when he finally broke down, scarcely able to hold up his head as he talked in Los Angeles to 3,500 one night, and the next night dragging himself out of bed by sheer force of willpower, and gave a talk to 1,500 others who could not get into the auditorium to hear him the night before. After speaking an hour and 10 minutes to this second audience, suffering the while, he was forced to leave the platform, a very sick man, while Brother Sexton finished his discourse and dismissed the assembly. At times, it seemed Brother Rutherford would die, but he rallied each time as though some unseen hand was healingly laid upon him, and now he is able to be up and about once more. He is bent upon leaving the health resort, although to do so might prove disastrous. I urged him to stay there.
Bonnet couldn't find Rutherford because Rutherford's out hiking through the mountains. And if you look at the photos of this resort, that would be quite a treacherous and difficult, strenuous journey for somebody who was supposedly sick and unable to get out of bed and travel by train to go all the way to Brooklyn on the exact day that he was supposed to be in court.
So even though, as it states, the condition of his health and lungs was such that a hypodermic injection to alleviate the intense suffering would prove fatal, it was that bad, but he's hiking. And he's scarcely been able to hold up his head when he talked in Los Angeles, dragging himself out of bed by sheer will of power, collapsing, all this. They paint it's a whole other picture from someone who could be hiking.
And yet we have reports from the Enterprise talking about those lectures where he sounds like he's the picture of hell.
It reminds you of when, whatever discussion it was, when he was in prison and he was claiming he was sick, but the letters going to the prison to his fellow inmates were saying it is definitely the fruits and food we are sending you, keeping you in good health. So everything with Watchtower seems to be two stories. Rutherford's and everybody else's that's documented. You know, it's a pattern.
And so his physician, who suggested he go to this particular hotel just north of San Bernardino, California, was a man named John Wesley Coolidge, who was some distant relation of President Coolidge. John Wesley Coolidge was a homeopathic chiropractic doctor. He's the one who suggested that Rutherford use alcohol, prescribed alcohol to him to help alleviate his issue, and then created a new one. He's also the one who suggested this particular hotel because it was known for another very new and radical treatment at the time, radioactive radium. And they had these radioactive radium baths. They had places where you could go and breathe in radium. That was one of those medical quack fads at the time that people thought was a great idea. And yet you had a lot of people dying from it. If you remember the story of Madame Curie, she ended up getting sick and dying as a result of prolonged exposure to that radioactive material. And Watchtower in the Golden Age, and a lot of Watchtower members who were chiropractics, you know, graduates of the Palmer Institute, which was one of the largest, or the original chiropractic schools in the nation, they were suggesting radium belts. You know, strap the radium around your waist and it'll cure everything from poor eyesight, kidney disease. You know, I'll read a whole bunch of them. Yeah.
That's like saying go to Japan where that nuclear meltdown happened and take a bath in the water. You know, it's granted, you know, a lot of people didn't know a lot of stuff back then that, you know, when science was blooming and, you know, coming of age and all that. But the other side of the coin here, something similar to all this is you're looking at, I'm looking here on screen at the brochure and the information about this resort. Okay. Back in its day, the average person would not be going to a place like that. It was today, anyone could go to a Holiday Inn or a Ramada or something like that. Now, you look at that, and back then multiply it because it was so few and far in between, the expense to do that. Who paid for that?
Dr. Coolidge.
Dr. Coolidge paid for it. Out of his own pocket?
It says that it was completely covered. It was gratis. It was free.
Now going back to like other things, the purchase of Beth Sarim and all that, this is where my skepticism comes in.
And remember, the purchase of Beth Sarim was another one of Rutherford's chiropractic doctors, Dr. Eckles.
Oh, okay, but
because Coolidge had died by that point in time.
Well, here's where I'm going with this. Watchtower and Rutherford, Watchtower today, they never make transparent their financial records, expense sheets, tally sheets, anything. It's all hidden. So it makes me wonder about money laundering. Okay, you send me here, prescribe it, you pay me, I'll write you a check later for an extra $500, an extra $15,000, and it won't look like I paid for it. There's people have called them to the task. People are calling them to task today.
Now, remember, we're not suggesting any money laundering is going on, but gifts are being accepted. And as the leader of a corporation, or especially a nonprofit corporation, those sorts of gifts need to be recorded. And so Beth Sarim, as an example, when that was called out, they had to publish an article in the Golden Age and suggested, well, this is for the ancient men of old when they come back. They called them the ancient worthies back then. And we'll deed the property to David and Isaac and Abraham and all of them when they come to San Diego.
Well, it's like buying a house today. I can give you partial down payment and you could pay me later. But as far as the bank is concerned, you came up with all the down payment on your own. I'm not, again, maybe I'm being more skeptical than you about this. When they're not transparent completely with their financial records for over 100 years, well over 100 years, and they're raising the kind of money they're raising, I'm suspect, and I can't prove it. And again, this is just my own personal feeling, but there's no question for me in my mind. Yeah, this was donated. Okay, here's a private check over here. Who had hands or any say over what Rutherford did? He did whatever he wanted. He even wrote a check, as we shown in another discussion, for $15,000, which in today's standards would be what, $250? Did we calculate?
It was a lot. Yeah, a lot.
For
we haven't even mentioned that yet.
Oh, okay. We leaked a little information, people. A little leaked information. Stay tuned. Another discussion for another time. It just gets deeper, folks. It just gets deeper.
So we're not suggesting complete money laundering, but in those early years, they were completely transparent with the numbers. You can see every single penny, right down to this individual pennies.
Well, by early years, you mean the pre-Rutherford.
Even during Rutherford's early years, you see that
when he first got it and was somewhat accountable.
Right. And then by the time you get to the late 1920s and 1930s,
takeover,
it's not recorded any longer. And now you start seeing these gifts. And it was that mansion, Beth Sarim, that the land was purchased by his next chiropractic doctor. Dr. Coolidge died in 1927 or 28, suddenly, radium. It says. But we don't know if it was radium, but he did.
I'm joking.
He did use a lot of radium. And he suggested a lot of radium treatments, and that's what Rutherford went for. And that's what you see advertisements in the St. Paul Enterprise for, radium treatment. And a lot of advertising in the Golden Age for these general ideas. And they were dangerous.
And wouldn't you know it, Henry Ford and the Dearborn Independent is also all wrapped up in this as well, promoting radium.
There's even a letter I found in the Enterprise, and this is that Watchtower secret newspaper, that Watchtower related newspaper, where this sister was sick and they kept giving her radium and she died. Radium was probably the cause, a primary cause of what might have sped her on to the grave. Very, very sad stories. How many others have died from treatments like that, or not accepting blood transfusions or organ donations earlier on?
That are completely acceptable now.
Exactly, except not blood transfusions, just fractions. And we already covered, we talked about some of the anti-Semitic conspiracies that Watchtower was using to justify their blood transfusion position. And yet there's more.